The following program is a public service presentation of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson.
For nearly 100 years, the League of Women Voters has fought for voting rights, voter education, and has worked to provide services and support to our voting process. We were the first sponsor of presidential debates.
I'm Dorothy Ridings, President of the League of Women Voters, the sponsor of tonight's first presidential debate between Republican Ronald Reagan and Democrat Walter Mondale.
The League of Women Voters' major reason for doing this was educating the public about the nominees and their political platforms and what they would say they would do so that we could hold them accountable after the election was over.
Many voters are very worried that tax cuts, nice as they are, will actually add to inflation.
It's one thing to hear them or to see them in sound bites, but it's an entirely different thing to see them in action. And I think the League understood that it was really important for people to see and hear the candidates before they made up their mind how to vote.
This is the first time for all of us to see the two major presidential candidates side by side with no aides and with no teleprompters.
The League of Women Voters institutionalized presidential debates in '76 and then in '80, and by '84, it was, there was no way the American public was going to let one of the nominees for a major political party duck the process of participating in presidential debate.
But in 2014, in Arizona, duck is just what they did. In early summer, the League of Women Voters announced plans to host 6 forums for candidates for statewide office.
Arizona Public Media is sponsoring tonight's forum in partnership with the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson.
The first was in July for Republican candidates for governor. 5 of the 6 were present, but one candidate leading the polls wasn't. The others noticed.
Mr. Smith, who is your question for?
Well, unfortunately, my question is for the person who's not here, and I wish that Mr. Ducey were here.
But that was just the tip of the iceberg, as it turned out. For the 5 league forums prior to the general election, no Republican candidate agreed to appear. The League was forced to host conversations with the remaining candidates. They were sparsely attended because voters were denied the ability to compare the candidates' positions. But while the candidates didn't appear at our forums, the public was bombarded with millions of dollars in campaign television advertisements, a good portion of which were funded by unknown sources. It even led to candidates attacking each other over so-called dark money.
What do we really know about Mark Brnovich? Brnovich's campaign has already benefited from $700,000 in secret, undisclosed money.
Millions of dollars in dark money were spent in Arizona in the 2014 election. It was a result of a Supreme Court ruling in 2010 removing campaign restrictions on corporations and on public inspection of donors. The problem, of course, is that the public then has no idea what these donors are seeking or getting from the candidate. Backroom deals? We'll never know.
Hello and welcome. I'm Roxanne Housley of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. I'm your host for a forum we've titled, Is Democracy for Sale? Can we afford it? For the next 90 minutes or so, we'll look back at Arizona's 2014 elections, focusing on 2 trends. One is the rise of dark money. The other is the growing tendency of candidates to decline to participate in candidate forums, substituting television commercials and their websites to help people, to get people to vote for them. Today, we have gathered 3 very knowledgeable panels to discuss these topics. First, we'll hear from the individuals who work in Arizona as political consultants. They help campaigns and candidates to get elected. Then, we'll hear from 2 people who have been on the front lines of a campaign. Candidates for statewide office in 2014 will share their experience. Finally, we'll talk to 3 journalists who cover politics in Arizona. They observe and report on the changes we're seeing. We'll get their insights. Now at the end, we'll save plenty of time for members of our audience to ask questions of any of the panelists. Let's get started by going behind the scenes of the campaigns to talk to the people who run companies that advise candidates and help them run their campaigns. This is a very lively and entertaining panel, I can tell you that much. And I want to start first with Max Foes. Max is the president and CEO of IWS, a national advertising and public affairs firm. His work on behalf of the firm's business has been recognized by news publications such as the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News and World Report, the Washington Post, just to name a few. Max was recognized by Politics Online, Harvard University, and the American Association of Political Consultants as one of the 25 internet professionals who are changing the world of politics. He has served on numerous charitable boards, including the Make-A-Wish Foundation of Arizona. Next, we have David Leibowitz. He founded Leibowitz Solo in 2009. Since then, it has become one of Arizona's and the Southwest go-to public relations, political, and crisis communication firms. He has been named Arizona's best news columnist, best sports columnist, best feature columnist, and best radio host. And he's covered the biggest stories in America, including political conventions to 9/11 and the Columbine shootings. And finally, Barrett Marson. Barrett spent about 12 years as a City Hall crime and courts reporter at newspapers across America before settling in 1999 in Arizona. Barrett covered a variety of beats for both the East Valley Tribune and the Arizona Daily Star, including the state capitol. After spending 4 years at the House of Representatives and then nearly 3 years at the Department of Corrections, Barrett launched Marson Media to help clients traverse the wild world of modern communications. He has worked with Republicans, Democrats, and dark money. So, gentlemen, let's get started. And David, I'm going to start with you.
Uh-oh.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
All right.
Do I have a choice?
So, no.
Okay.
All right. So, for the audience, first, what we'd like you to do is tell us a little bit about what political consultants do and describe, if you would, the role you play in helping candidates communicate their priorities and their policies to voters during the campaign.
Political campaigns are about mathematics. Political consultants, people who run political campaigns, are basically employed to have their candidates get one more vote than everybody else. You do that by building a coalition, by staking out positions that will, in the best way possible, put forward for a candidate what their gut, what their heart and soul tells them about a position in a way that will push that coalition in the right direction. Political campaigns are about managing optics and feelings to get that one more voter to vote for your person. I mean, I hope that's helpful.
That is.
I mean, you say, well, you know, what do I do? I would often work with a political candidate, not to tell them what to say ever, but to take what they believe on an issue and to turn that into a coherent message that will push voters. I mean, a lot of people, you know, our media friends here, they all think that political campaigns work on issues. They don't. People don't really vote based on their intellect. They vote based on their heart or based on their gut, and their head ratifies that decision. So what we do is we take a message and put it into a set of, you know, a wrapping that pushes people in our direction.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anything else you want to add to that? Either Max
I'm going
or
to actually
Barrett?
wait and attack these guys' answers after, if you don't mind. So I like to reserve my time for the rebuttal period.
You know, I don't know the experience of both David and Max, but what I have generally found is you can talk a lot to a candidate about how to say something, what to say, but whether they listen or not is a whole nother story. They often, the candidate will often go out and still be themselves, no matter how much you've attempted to coach them to do it a little differently. And so that's oftentimes almost a big problem in a campaign is the candidate wants to sort of do the message themselves rather than listen to the consultants that they're paying good
How
money
dare
to.
those candidates want to be
They
themselves?
want to do their own thing. Do you find that to be the case, Matt?
Well, the other thing I think we do is, candidates want to be, a candidate has to be real and authentic, and I think voters see through that when they're not. But the other thing we do is help candidates, with the most important resource they have, and that's their time, and how to spend their time, whether it's fundraising, whether it's going to debates, whether it's doing an interview on the radio, whether it's spending time on social media, and whether it's fundraising, because there's always more money to be raised, there's always more money to be spent. But the most important thing is time, and so we help candidates with managing that most important asset, because, and one of the reasons I like elections is because you have a winner or a loser at the end of the day, and it's like sports, and there's a decision, and it's done, and we all move forward. So we work with campaigns and candidates to manage, their entire campaign, but where they're going to spend their time, what are they going to say, how they're going to spend their money once they've raised that money, because that's important. Are they going to be on TV? Are they going to spend time coming to Tucson for a debate? Are they going to spend time on a direct mail or social media? And that's as important as what they say. It's where they're going to spend their money. So.
Right. Thank you. Well, since we touched a little bit, or you touched a little bit on forums and debates and coming to Tucson, what I'd like to know is, are candidate debates and forums, are they viable today? Is it an effective way for candidates to really communicate their views to voters? And in addition to that, have you ever recommended to a candidate that they not attend a forum or debate?
Absolutely.
Who would like to take that one?
I will start because
Okay.
I ran Paul Gosar's campaign in 2010, and Channel 8 did their debate, I think 2 weeks before the election, and we were ahead in the polls. And we had more to lose by going to, and it wasn't a debate, it was on Horizon in Phoenix, and we had more to lose by going to that debate than to win. And so we recommended and made a decision as a campaign not to attend Horizon, which we caught a lot of scrutiny from in the press. But the decision was made. It's where could we spend now Congressman Gosar's time better, and it was made a decision we could spend it more by talking to other voters and not attending that forum where clearly he was going to be attacked. And I know now Governor Ducey didn't attend a debate down in Tucson, and I would have to say that campaign made the right decision not to attend that debate because Governor Ducey was ahead in the polls. He had more to lose from attending that debate than to win from coming down and maybe saying something or opening himself up to the attacks that were getting more and more vicious, as the campaign election day came near. So.
Roxanne, I founded a podcast, coppertalkaz.com, for anyone who wants to go on there. And we hosted a forum for all the gubernatorial candidates. Every one of them showed up. But it was one of 3 forums that day that they were scheduled to attend. Right. The amount of forums that occurred in this race, in the gubernatorial race, was, and I'm sure Christine Jones will tell you later, it was a waste of time. And especially because most of them say the same thing at all. They've practiced their answers, and I tried to come up with a little bit of different questions, maybe to knock them off their script. They were all, if you saw one forum, you saw them all, because they pretty much stuck to the same script at everything.
Forums suffer from the same problem as the rest of American life. Okay, so let me, as an American, I'd say, I wish we all had time to pay attention to forums, and that we all voted based on issues, and that we studied the elections, and we understood the candidates, and we understood the nuances. But unfortunately, we all have a raging case of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We don't pay attention to those things, and so forums have become kind of a 20th century solution to a 21st century election. And so in that regard, there's just so much more competition for people's attention that a forum becomes increasingly difficult to get people to pay attention. I would imagine, having been to a number of forums, if you saw somebody under the age of 45 at a forum, you would think they were giving away free alcohol, that they were not there for the actual information.
Okay, that's an interesting comment. Well then, how do you recommend that candidates effectively communicate their priorities, their views
to voters? How do we?
Well, I mean, the most effective way to do it would be to raise an enormous amount of money and go on television and fire a shotgun blast at everybody. The probably least effective way to do it would be to go ahead and talk to a very small number of people for an extended period of time, which is where, unfortunately, again, as an American, I wish we were voting based on issues, because I think we would have better candidates and we'd have better elections. As a political consultant, there's just an enormous number of ways to avail yourself of getting your message out.
It's like the technology has passed by political forums, and you have social media, you have Twitter and Facebook, and teletown halls that Christine Jones did a number of, and every candidate did. And Christine Jones could talk to 20,000 people on a teletown hall from her office, from her campaign office, or attend a political forum where maybe 100 people show up, right? And it maybe gets covered in the press because, like Barrett said, it is the fourth one they attended that day. And so technology has passed by the days where, you take a train to a political forum, you get off and you talk and you have a debate, and then you go get on the train to the next one. Now that time has passed, and unfortunately, and to the League of Women Voters' success, everyone has duplicated their political forum, and there's a political forum every day coming out for political campaigns. You probably get, again, scheduling that candidate's time is the most important thing, and you probably get requests for 4 to 5 political forums a day to attend to, and you just can't attend them all.
So maybe you gentlemen would be willing to help the League of Women Voters move into the 21st century,
Well,
and we are a nonprofit.
But I'd say, I'd say this. I mean, part of it is, look, if there's a price to pay for failing to do something in a political campaign, consultants will look at that price and try to calculate it and do a cost-benefit analysis. There's a reason everybody shows up for the Iowa debates and the presidential races. There's a reason they show up for the presidential debates. There's an enormous price to pay for not doing that, because those things are moments in time when everybody pays attention. But the lower profile the race and the lower information the voters have, the less of a price there is to pay. So it's nothing the League is doing wrong. By any stretch of the imagination. The League is doing something that is very right indeed, and I think it's a failure. If I'm going to damn anybody, it would be the voters.
Thank you.
And there were, in the gubernatorial race, there were 4 or 5 debates across the entire state, several of them televised. As Max and David say, it's just a scheduling of time. Right. I mean, those things take a lot of time to drive to the event itself, get home. Those are long days.
All right. I want to move quickly into another area. We've heard candidates express concern that dark money, those are those large donations by unknown donors, not subject to the candidate's control, are affecting and even dominating campaigns. Is this true in your experience? And what are the consequences? And what should be done about dark money, if anything?
I'll start. Look, the public doesn't care. At the end of the day, I mean, some candidates, Mr. Goddard, who I have an enormous amount of respect for, ran against dark money and lost. There were many, many commercials about Mark Brnovich's use of dark money. I worked for Felicia Rodolini. We lost. The public, the whole idea of dark money being bad presupposes that the public needs to know where the money came from. The public barely knows who the candidates are, much less where the money came from. With all due respect to our media friends, they rant and rave about dark money. They don't cover where the not dark money comes from. Okay. So to me, it's a little bit absurd.
And that's an excellent point. Doug Ducey raised millions of dollars, his own campaign. I didn't see any stories about who in the business community, what kind of people were giving to Doug Ducey, so that there was dark money benefiting him that people didn't know about. Well, the money that did benefit him that we do know about, nobody cared to discuss that. The electorate generally doesn't care. And so, they care about the messages maybe in the TV commercials, but they don't necessarily care who's funding them. And,
we go and we're calling it, someone coined the term dark money, and really it's money in politics. And when has that ever not happened? And it's never going to stop. There's a lot of people upset that a campaign won, and a lot of people won by playing by the rules and doing what is legal. And money in politics is legal. The Supreme Court, 4 years ago, as we saw in the video before we started, said it was legal. And so, we're all like sitting at the stoplight, and we're upset because the person next to us got to the next light quicker by driving the same speed limit that's the posted speed limit. It's legal. It's politics and money are never going to be separated. I wish it was more transparent. I wish voters cared enough, as David said, that they would look at who's giving the campaigns and it would influence their vote. But outside of the political echo chamber and the talking class, I agree with David and Barrett that I don't think people are concerned enough about whose money is, what money's coming into politics and where it's coming in. And David and I were talking before this, and one person's dark money is another person's money, right?
Gentlemen, we have about 30 seconds left, so as a wrap up, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you in a sentence to tell us the single most important point for our audience to understand and take away from this conversation.
That it is important to listen to the messages, whether they come from the traditional media, new media, the campaigns themselves, that it is important to get involved and become a high information voter.
Okay.
We get the elections we deserve. If we'd like to have better candidates and better elected leaders, we will need to pay attention to the process and the type of detail that we would like our candidates to pay attention to governing.
Thank you. Max?
I would say get involved, whether through social media, attending a forum like this, however it is you can get involved and make sure you vote.
For our people.
Thanks to all of you. I know our audience has questions for you, so please stick around and we will get to them shortly. It takes special people to decide to run for statewide political office. Campaigning is a grueling, difficult job, unpaid and frequently lasting up to 2 years. Candidates give up their normal life and go out to work to get elected. 2 people who did just that last year now join us. First, I'd like to introduce Christine Jones. Christine is a former Republican candidate for governor, as well as a former executive VP, general counsel, and corporate secretary for GoDaddy Operating Company. Christine made it a priority to establish GoDaddy as a leader in the fight to make the internet better and safer for users, particularly children. Prior to GoDaddy, Christine worked for a Phoenix law firm, focusing primarily on commercial litigation. Christine also does a significant amount of pro bono work, mentors young women on a variety of subjects, and can routinely be found teaching students about the dangers of the internet. Terry Goddard was born and raised right here in Tucson, Arizona, graduated from Harvard College, served an active duty tour in the U.S. Navy before returning to Arizona, where he received his law degree at ASU. During his time as a private attorney, he worked in the Arizona Attorney General's office, where he prosecuted white-collar crime. Terry was our state's Attorney General from 2003 to 2011, with a focus on cybercrime, consumer protection, predatory lending, and deceptive advertising. Terry was the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State in this past election. He currently runs his own law firm, Goddard Law Office. Welcome to both of you. So let's get started. And to both candidates, you've just heard the responses from our consultants. Did anything particularly resonate with either of you that you'd like to respond to now? Christine, I'll start with you.
Well, talking about forums in particular, in my race, and I can only use mine as an example, I did 55 forums and debates. Yeah, I don't know if it's the most of any candidate, but it's among the most. Some people joined later in the race and some people got out earlier, so I had the advantage of being there the whole time. But it was a really, really helpful thing for me as a candidate to get in front of people, because the good news is in Arizona, there are thousands and thousands of smart, capable, thoughtful, caring, inventive people, incredible people. And I really liked the opportunity to go out and meet those people. Now, it was frustrating as a candidate when other candidates wouldn't show up, because I really like the live interaction. I'm kind of a more nimble person. I really like the engagement. So for me to sit here and listen to a political consultant say and admit affirmatively that he advised his clients not to show up really makes me irritated. But I also have to say, if I'm being honest and being forthright, that he was right. In the end, not showing up for debates served well the candidates that he advised. The candidates who ended up ultimately winning and who were sitting in the state capitol this morning didn't show up for very many debates. So I guess you have to give the consultants their due. If their highest goal is to win an office, then their advice actually worked.
Terry.
Well, I'd like to thank the League for putting on this retrospective, because I think there's too little of that. You get to Election Day and all of a sudden you breathe a huge sigh of relief and try to forget about it for the next 6 months or longer until the next cycle starts. And I think there's been far too little reflection. I think what this panel's and this entire session really is about is democracy on life support. Because what we heard from the panel of consultants, and I commend them for being very frank, is disturbing for our democracy. And what we saw in the last election, especially the rise of dark money, I think is especially disturbing for our democracy. The bottom line is these elections are not about candidates anymore. When $28 million of independent and dark money came into the Arizona election in the last cycle, in the 2014 cycle, that overwhelmed the amount the candidates themselves were spending. So people running the ads, people doing the campaigns, were not candidates. They were third parties. Now we can get into the distinction between dark money and independent expenditures in a minute. But I think the deception or the misstatement that was made by the previous panel was that they coached candidates. That really isn't happening anymore. And the lack of appearance at debates is a symptom of that. Because we're not looking at comparative candidates, we're looking at comparative mythologies. The attack on me was that I was President Obama. I don't think I am, but that in fact had nothing to do with Secretary of State, had nothing to do with local issues. There was a very effective attack ad that basically said, well, Terry's just like Obama and you don't like Obama, here's why. And that was the end of the session. Well, how do you debate that? I don't think you can. And I think what the League needs to do is, and this has come out, and Christine is frankly the expert on alternative or new media, need to be part of a new way that people receive their information. And second, I believe the League fails to have consequences for people not showing up. This is the gold standard of debates. League of Women Voters, forum debates are and should be considered where people have to come to express their ideas. And the option of not coming, as you heard very clearly in the opening piece, should not be on the table. And I think there are a couple of ways to do that I'd like to propose, but I don't want to keep talking, so I'll wait for that question.
I think we're going to get there in a minute. Thank you, Terry. So during the 2014 campaign, do you feel that you were able to communicate your positions and priorities effectively to voters, and in what way? Christine, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. I think I was quite capable of that. In fact, if I go back and look at the numbers in my race, I went from 0 to leading in the polls in about 7 months by doing just exactly that. And if we're going to admit and look at this in point of fact, non-campaign contributions, non-candidate controlled messages changed the outcome of the race in both of our races specifically. So yeah, I got my message out there. And then a whole bunch of money came from outside sources to complicate the voters' perception of me, right? So I found out a lot about myself that I didn't know.
Well, weren't you surprised that the new Christine Jones?
Oh, yeah. So I found out I had lied about being in the Air Force. I didn't. I found out that I was a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton. No offense to any fans here. I'm not. I found out that what else that I had never been a prosecutor after the 3 years that I worked in the DA's office. So, I found out a lot about myself. My message was my message, but if you're gonna outspend, that voice becomes louder. It's very powerful, and it's one of the reasons I think the two of us are sitting here today to say, while we protect free speech and while we fiercely defend constitutional rights, among them the most sacred, the right to engage in anonymous political speech, how do we balance that with getting voters messages that are meaningful from candidates? And that's the real question we have to answer as a community. It's not easy. It's a very complex, thoughtful discussion that we have to have.
All right, so thank you, Christine. I want to jump into clean election money, because both of you used clean election dollars. No, Terry.
I ran traditionally.
That's right. And that's funding candidate campaigns from government money rather than by private individuals or organizations. Terry, you were in the minority. What do you think the future holds for clean elections?
Clean elections is dead in Arizona, and we unfortunately have taken the lead in the country in saying that there should be a level playing field, there should be similar resources for each candidate. And they should not depend upon your respective fundraising capacities, but rather in the message that you have to put forward. I think that was fundamental in 1998 when the voters of Arizona put clean elections in place. And today, without matching funds and with very small amounts going to the candidates that run statewide or in the legislature with clean election money, I just don't think candidates in the future, unless there's some significant changes to the clean elections process, I don't think they're going to be able, they're not going to have that option to elect to be clean elections candidates, unless they're in safe legislative districts and there really isn't any competition.
Thank you. Well, I think that both of you do believe that dark money was a factor in your campaign process. So if so, let's dive in and talk about its effect. And you want to start, Christine?
Sure. It clearly, outside money changed the result of my election. If you compare campaign spending to campaign spending between me and the 7 men that I was running against, the outcome was absolutely changed by the use of outside money. But I think a couple of things we have to caution ourselves about. One, a lot of corporate contributions have been criticized, particularly from, if I could just name names, from APS, for example, here in Arizona, because APS played in certain races and tried to change the outcome of those races. We have to be very careful about criticizing a company like APS, whose directors and officers have a fiduciary duty by law to maximize the value for their shareholders. That is their obligation, and it's not an option. They must, by law, do that. So we've left them no choice but to engage in those elections. So if we don't like it, we need to say we're going to change the rules before we start to criticize them. That's the first thing. Okay. Even though in my race it changed it, okay, and I didn't like it, we have to be careful that we are a system of laws. The second thing is there are states that have done this meaningfully. Some states have unlimited contributions from individuals. In my particular case, I had an outside group that was spending on my behalf. It wasn't dark. Bob Parsons, the founder of GoDaddy, went on television and advertised that he was doing it. Okay, there was nothing dark about it. I wish he could have given me that $2 million. I would love to have had control over that part of the message, right? But I think that those are, right, would you love to have somebody write you the check for $2 million?
I'm just thinking what that says about how Parsons spent the money, but let's put that aside for a minute.
Well, I have had that conversation with him.
I bet you have.
But I do think we have to think through the we hate dark money mantra to say what is the outcome that we're trying to strive for. The Supreme Court, and we're both lawyers, so we follow the law, the letter of the law. What is the outcome, and how are we going to get there while protecting the constitutional rights that we hold so dear?
Well, let me propose a radical concept, taking up on what has just been said, and that is that candidates are no longer at the center of campaigns. The independent expenditures and dark money together, corporate money largely, have changed the scenario. And you find very often what Christine Jones just described, which is you may have somebody with the best motives in the world to support you, and they may do an absolutely idiotic ad, which actually has fundamentally negative consequences. We had that in Phoenix recently in a city council race, where I think the money that was spent, lots of money, ended up rebounding against the person they were trying to help. But here's my radical concept, and that is that all money spent on behalf of a candidate should be the responsibility of that candidate. We all know the ads, federal ads, where they say, I'm John McCain and I approve this message. I think that's a commendable statement, but now it only applies to a tiny amount of the communications that you have in an election.
Terry,
certainly a minority.
Excuse me, how would you suggest then moving that idea forward?
Well, it's very hard to move that idea forward in the current context because Bob Parsons and others have a right to spend their money and to bet on television and to do what they want. Yeah. We have a sort of a mythological beast, which is we prohibit coordination between the fundamental campaign and the independent campaigns. I think nobody's fooled by that. There is at least winks, nods, and various communications that goes on. The real change has been the wash, the huge avalanche, tidal wave, whatever metaphor you want, of corporate money that the Supreme Court unleashed in 2010 with the Citizens United case. But there are a lot of misconceptions about that, and it included the beginning here by the League of Women Voters, where it said the Supreme Court opened the door for corporate money and basically prohibited disclosure. The second part is wrong. The Supreme Court, in fact, encourages disclosure, and they have said there is no First Amendment barrier to requiring people who are in the public debate to identify themselves. And the big problem, and I think the one we have to deal with as responsible citizens, is that there's a whole lot of money, $15 million in the Arizona context, just in the 2014 election, that came from anonymous sources. That was basically the people spending that money wanted to participate, wanted to influence our votes, and didn't want us to know who they were. So if it's APS or if it's somebody else, I do think the citizens have a right to know who's trying to buy their vote, and in fact have to know that. And that's the big change that needs to take place.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes left. Terry, at this point, would you like to discuss an initiative that you have before the legislature?
I'd like to suggest how the league could be more effective in their debate if we could just not leave the stage without that.
Super, thank
because
you.
There are no consequences.
Okay.
Basically, we had Kissing Your Sister programs, which, for instance, I had a mock debate with David Garcia, who was running for superintendent of public instruction, because our respective opponents wouldn't show up. Obviously, that didn't help the league. It didn't help the two of us. We came out of respect for the League of Women Voters, but there was no consequence. And when you start this process, league, I presume as a citizen and an active participant, to say there need to be consequences. And you need to negotiate your media contract that says whether both sides show up or not, there's going to be a televised debate. It may have an empty chair. It may have a statue on one side. But there have to be consequences so that the Max Foses of the world can't responsibly tell their candidate, you're better off not to come.
And let me just add one point to that, and that is that 55 is too many. Okay, I literally had days when I had 3
You're
scheduled.
saturating the market.
It's too many. So, and this is a leadership issue among the two parties if we're going to be in a two-party system. So I would encourage the league to negotiate with the two parties to say, we're going to do X number, and that's it. And if you're in Pinal County or you're in Pima or you're in Apache or you're in Mojave or wherever you are, this is the day that you come to hear these people. That would go a long way to helping candidates, and I think the League of Women Voters as well, to sustain this great reputation that you have for kind of inventing this magical formula to get candidates in front of voters. I encourage it to continue.
And then you use all the media options. You live stream it on the net. You do everything else that can be done to make sure that we break through, or that the league breaks through this barrier that's been created. I mean, I made a note to myself, which is people don't watch debates, they don't read editorials, and they really don't read linear news. That's the change. That's the market we have to reach, and you have to accept that. Now, let me, in the 2 seconds I've got left, say yes, I think dark money is a serious attack on our democracy. I think it has to be changed. We have to have transparency here in Arizona. The Supreme Court opened the door, but it is up now to state legislatures to come through and to provide those transparency opportunities. Senator Farley, Representative Wheeler, a number of other people in our legislature are working on that in this session. I applaud that. I intend to try to support it. If they fail, and they might, I hope not, but if they do, then I fully intend to work with anybody who's interested on a citizens initiative to try to make sure that Arizona is no longer the playground in the United States for dark money and forces that are anonymous.
Thank you. We are wrapping up. I want to thank you for your comments, and also, I know our league members will greatly appreciate your thoughts about continuing on with forums. One of the great strengths of our democracy comes from the news media. News reporters expose, cover, report, and editorialize. We have 3 people who covered the 2014 elections in Arizona to get their viewpoint on the new and changing trends. So I'd like to introduce our panel to you, and you know that they're journalists. When I received their bios, they were very succinct, to the point, and one or two sentences. So we'll be brief here. Jeremy Duda is a Phoenix native and a University of Arizona alum, graduating in 2002 with a degree in journalism. Since 2008, he's been the governor's office reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times, where he also covers election law, campaign finance, and other issues. Prior to joining the Capitol Times, he wrote for the Hobbs News Sun in New Mexico and the Daily Herald of Provo, Utah. Next to Jeremy is Joe Ferguson. Joe's a graduate of the University of Arizona. He worked at the Arizona Daily Sun in Flagstaff, covering their city council before joining the Tucson Daily Star in 2013. As a student, he spent a semester covering the state legislature and also a summer covering the U.S. House of Representatives for Congress Daily. Joe was a part of a two-man team covering the 2014 elections for the Star. And finally, Jim Ninsel. He is a senior writer at the Tucson Weekly and host of Zona Politics, a public affairs TV show airing Sunday mornings at 9:30 a.m. on Channel 9. In 2014, the Arizona Newspaper Association named Jim a Journalist of the Year, and the Association of Alternative News Media honored his long-running Tucson Weekly column, The Skinny, as the best alt-weekly political column in the country. He also serves as a Southern Arizona correspondent for Phoenix PBS affiliate KAET 8 and teaches government reporting at the U of A School of Journalism. Welcome to our panelists. Well, let's get started. We've heard responses from consultants now and candidates. Was there anything specific which any of you would like to comment on at the outset? So, who would like to tackle that one?
I thought it was interesting hearing some of the consultants talk about, specifically Max talk about advising people to skip debates. It's one of those things where if it works for your candidates, you'll tell them to do that. And if it doesn't work, your candidate might attack someone else for doing it. Max, you mentioned that you advised Paul Gosar to skip a debate in 2010, yet in 2014 your client was Scott Smith, who was on video here criticizing Doug Ducey for missing debates. So these things are all circumstantial. If you're getting attacked by dark money and you're not getting any, you're going to go after your opponent for that. If you're getting the dark money, you're probably not going to say anything.
Yeah, I think the point that was made about whether or not there's consequences for skipping these debates is an important one, because I don't think there is a lot of consequences, as we saw on Election Day. Folks who did not attend debates and who benefited from dark money won their elections. The point that people are not voting based on campaign finance issues is an important one as well. I think there's a lot of people out there who decry the money in politics. I think a lot of voters are sick of the money in politics. They are sick of how many campaign ads are being thrust upon us during the campaign season. They get very tired of watching them over and over again on the TV sets. But that's not what's moving people. I think the point that when the emotional appeal to people's hearts moves people more, and a lot of these issues are complicated issues, and it's difficult to bring context to them in a short attention span world where you try to explain the background of these issues and what the issues mean and where the candidates' positions are on them. But getting that, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't necessarily make them drink. And that's the challenge I think we face as journalists, especially in a world where the internet has upended so many institutions. It's upended the institutions of government and of education and of journalism and of politics. And there are alternatives. In the old days, we were the way people got their message out, whether it was via debates or via the newspaper articles or the television stories. And now candidates have a lot of alternatives, and they don't need us, and they can get their message out without us.
Right. Well, then, so it's come up a couple of times now, the lack of consequences for skipping debates and forums. So what I'd like to know is how should the media then focus attention on a candidate's failure to address either to attend debates or to address relevant policy issues? Do you want to take that, Jeremy?
Well, we can write about these things, and we frequently do. Doug Ducey got criticized a lot, both in the primary election and in the general election. Mm-hmm. And we'll write about this, and their opponents will talk about it, but if the voters don't really care, then the voters don't really care. You can only write about one thing so much, before you're really beating a dead horse. And I think it's kind of the same thing with dark money. We care who is funding all of these campaigns. We write about who's funding all these campaigns. But a voter isn't going to, see an ad on TV and go on the Secretary of State's website and start looking up campaign finance reports and say who funded this one, who funded this one. But we'll write about it, and sometimes we'll write about it a lot. But once again, it all comes down to how much the voters themselves really care, because the information is out there. We can put it out there, but if they're not engaged and they don't really pay that much attention, then it's not really going to have much of an effect.
Okay. And one of the consultants said it was about numbers, and that's a good calculation. We didn't see some of these candidates really come to Tucson at all, yet they still won the election. Mm-hmm. They had smaller budgets, they were outspent, and they still won. So, for newspapers, like mine, we mentioned who they are, we tried our best to talk to them, but we ran stories that said they wouldn't respond to us at all. And it still was a political calculation by them not to talk to us.
I think it was Mr. Goddard that said that we're seeing a democracy on life support. Would any of the three of you like to comment on that? What's your view on that?
Well, we're certainly seeing it change very dramatically from where it was, 20 years ago in terms of how voters make their decisions. I think the clean elections system, as Terry said, is most definitely on life support. The amount of money you get to run a statewide campaign is really strictly peanuts, given how many voters you have to reach and the way you have to get a message out to them. It becomes very difficult. I think it works, and I'm not even sure clean elections has resulted in a better state. I mean, if you look back to where the legislature was before clean elections and where it is now, I don't think you have a better legislature in the clean elections era than you did before clean elections.
Any other thoughts?
I think that this trend with clean elections, this is going to continue. They've taken blow after blow after blow, starting with Citizens United in 2010, and then that same Supreme Court gutted the matching funds provision of the system, which was really the biggest killer to clean elections. And now it's piling it on. We have these new contribution limits in Arizona; they're much higher than they were before, just further and further disincentivizing that system.
Joe, what do you think is the media's role in covering elections? I know you were very active in this last campaign cycle.
I mean, it's trying to be everywhere you can be. So in addition to covering what's going on, you have to be the candidate's best friend and ask them the tough questions, ask them the follow-up, ask them the questions that are out there. And it's a struggle in the new face of all these ads and lack of interaction with the public. So it's a watchdog in a lot of ways.
In the past, endorsements by respected newspapers have been sought after by candidates. Do you think endorsements are as influential today as they were in the past, and why or why not?
I think it depends on what race you're talking about. I don't think a Tucson Weekly endorsement is particularly persuasive in a Republican primary. I suspect, in fact, Republican candidates avoid getting an endorsement from the Tucson Weekly in a Republican primary, if at all possible. But I think if it's a low information race, if it's a school board race, if it's perhaps a legislative race, an endorsement will carry a little more weight, because people really don't know those candidates as well as they know a gubernatorial candidate or a attorney general candidate or of someone of a higher stature.
Okay. Jeremy or Joe, do you have a comment on that?
I think they matter a little bit, but certainly not what they used to. You see the candidates will put that on their signs sometimes, but if a candidate's way out ahead, or if a candidate's way behind and they get that endorsement, that's not going to tip the race for them. And as Jim said, in these lower information races, I think it matters a little bit less, stuff where people aren't seeing the TV ads, maybe aren't seeing any debates. It still matters a little bit, but kind of like the rest of our industry, not nearly as much as it used to, unfortunately.
We heard from the consultants that the public doesn't care about dark money. Do you agree with that?
I think the public is generally disgusted with the idea of spending in they're not happy with the amount of money being spent in politics, and I think they're especially uncomfortable with the idea of not knowing who's spending this. They'd like to see disclosure. Mm-hmm. Although if you have disclosure, as I think Barrett pointed out earlier, I'm not sure a lot of people are pouring through those reports to find out exactly who is contributing here or there. But I do think that it's not something that moves voters one way or another. They're unhappy with it, but perhaps they blame both sides, or I don't know exactly what's going on in the minds of voters. But it's, as we said, Terry very specifically ran against dark money, and it didn't make a big difference in his race.
Okay.
I think to the average voter, it's, like you said, more an issue of money in politics overall. I think if they know about dark money, if they know what that is, and they know that it's happening more and more, yeah, it's something that the average voter, I think, really dislikes. But the question is, how much does the average voter know about that? Bob Parsons ran a lot of ads for Christine Jones in the primary, and I don't think, then a lot of groups who we don't know who's really funding them ran a lot of ads for Doug Ducey in that primary, and I don't think most voters said, well, I don't like all this money in politics, but at least we know who's funding that ad instead of that ad.
I think the influx of the money burned out a lot of people in terms of their interest in politics. Once you couldn't turn on the television anymore without seeing an ad, I think it burned out the attention span of most voters to the point where they turned it off, they tuned it off, and a lot of them didn't go to the polls. We saw that in Pima County.
Unfortunate, but true. How do you think candidates should communicate with the public then about their views? I mean, what's the most effective way from a journalist point of view?
If you're trying to win a race, I think, the most effective way is clearly, having millions of dollars and running TV ads. Money isn't everything in a campaign. You don't necessarily have to have the most money, but you have to have enough to compete, and you have to have, if your opponent's all over the airwaves, you've got to be all over the airwaves. You've got to be able to match them on that.
Any other thoughts?
Well, on the topic of forums, I have attended forums for legislative candidates where the only people in there are, relatives of the candidates. I think a lot of these forums, the people who will go to a forum are generally not undecided voters. They're voters who have made up their minds and they want to support their team, or they don't care if they don't show up at all. And that's, I think, an unfortunate shift in the way forums operate in terms of our democracy and how people are receiving the information. But I do think that as we've seen campaigning change, these forums have definitely declined in terms of their importance, and television has become much more important. Television ads, the robocalls, the mailers, all the other ways you have of getting your message out is a more effective way. I think a lot of times forums become opportunities for candidates to hope their opponent slips up and they get some sort of video out of that they can be amplified through their own campaign spending.
Joe, anything on that?
Well, I think, though, that's part of the issue is that, for these campaigns is that these forums are largely recitations of speeches, prepared speech. I mean, the campaigns, all the time where it's the same speech over and over again. And people understand that and are savvy to that and don't want to go to something where there isn't any real discussion. It's just a prepared statement, 2 minutes down.
Okay. Well, over time, the time that you've been reporting on elections, do you think that the voter knowledge regarding candidates has increased or decreased? I mean, how informed are our citizens before they vote?
I think there's more information out there than there ever has been because of the internet. But how much people are tuning into that, I think, changes per election cycle and per race, and it really just kind of depends on what's going on. But I think there's, I teach government reporting at the university. These two fine gentlemen were both students of mine, and I'm certainly glad to see you've come a long way, boys. But I focus early on in the class on a concept called rational ignorance, which is people are very busy. They have a lot of things to worry about in their lives, and understanding the ins and outs of politics takes a lot of time, and time is valuable to people. And so they don't necessarily want to cue in on all of these different issues, which is one of the reasons you see them sorting themselves into Republicans or Democrats and basically voting for their team. And that's, you've got this interesting trend of a growing number of people choosing to not be part of either team, saying pox on both your houses. But even independents tend to lean one way or the other. It's not like independents are this third way of thinking that rejects both. They pretty much sort out as well into those two groups. And I think a lot of people just reduce it down to your fundamentals of D or R.
Okay. We have just a
couple of minutes before we wrap up. What changes maybe would any one of the three of you suggest to raise voter knowledge? I mean, you talked about, we are bombarded with a lot of issues and time is precious, but what can you do to improve voter knowledge and maybe even help with voter turnout?
If I knew that, I probably would have been one of the consultants up on the panel. That's the million-dollar question. No one's really quite sure how to do that. We can keep doing what we do and just keep writing our stories and getting as much information out there as possible. But in the end, you can't really force people to read. People have to kind of get interested on their own, and I'm not entirely sure how you really do that.
Waterboarding, perhaps. We can tie them down and pour knowledge into their face until they choke on it.
Joe, any thoughts?
Just cover them year-round, cover them all the time. Make politics something that is something we do not just for 3 months out of every 24. You do it year-round to explain why these votes matter. I mean, politics is really sexy at the federal level, but it's the local people that can really affect your lives. And so having us there to cover that is probably the best way to explain why it's important year-round.
Thank you. I know the members of the League will appreciate that response. Thank you. Our audience has been very patient, but I know they have questions for our panelists. Because of limited space, we've asked audience members to line up at a microphone to ask their questions. We've also asked them to identify themselves and let us know to whom their question is directed. Let's take our first question.
My name is Phyllis Carnahan, and my question is directed to Terry Goddard. You mentioned briefly that Bruce Wheeler was going to introduce a bill dealing with dark money and the disclosure of it. Would you elaborate, please?
Well, I haven't seen what Representative Wheeler may be putting into the hopper. The next questioner I see in your line is Senator Steve Farley, and he's had a lot to say about dark money in the past sessions. I would like to say that I run into people throughout the state who are active, regardless of their party, independents, Republicans, Democrats, who feel that anonymous expenditures for political purposes is wrong. It's anti-democratic. It's against our whole system that we have in this country. I believe there are a couple of things that have to be in a statute. One is define what is a political action, and that includes these great educational ads. I put education in quotes that say, not vote for a particular candidate, but please write Senator so-and-so and tell them that they've been abusing children, or whatever the operative item is. Supreme Court has said that's not political speech. I disagree, and I think the legislature can use what we call a bright line test to basically say if it's close to an election, it names a candidate, the presumption now is that it's meant to influence the election. The second part is peeling the onion. I know that sounds a little bit graphic, but so many of these dark money anonymous contributions are made through a nesting doll sequence of corporations. We have to get to the original contributor. And I guess I'd like to ask the next questioner how he plans to do that, because I think Senator Farley is going to play a major role in making this happen. But it is, I believe, a very nonpartisan issue that affects Arizonans of goodwill and of concern about our political system throughout the state.
Thank you, Terry. Let's go ahead and take our next question.
Great. I'm Senator Steve Farley, as you may have heard.
Welcome.
I represent the good people of District 9 here in Tucson, everything north of Speedway and south of Oro Valley. And yes, I have been working for several years on the dark money issue. In the last session in particular, I worked on a bill with a very large stakeholder group with Michelle Reagan, who's the current Secretary of State and your former opponent, Mr. Goddard, in the last election, in which we had people from both sides together in the room. Mike Liberty was in the room, who's now the counsel for the governor. We had people who had worked on dark money campaigns to talk about what we can do to promote disclosure. Because everyone in the room agreed that disclosure could be a good thing for us to talk about. I'm not sure if Mr. Liberty agrees with that anymore now in his new position, but he did at the time. So I'm going to be introducing that bill again and seeing how it goes in this legislature. And the fact that Senator Reagan and I worked on it last year shows that there can be bipartisan support for such a thing. Because ultimately, if we don't have transparency in government, how can we have legitimacy in government? We depend on people believing that we are doing what we are doing for good reasons that we expose to the public in order for our laws to be obeyed and not simply dismissed by the public as things that aren't relevant to them. That's sort of a foundational element of our democracy.
And what is your question for a panelist?
Well, my question is actually for the three cynical but successful consultants. And you can decide amongst yourselves who wants to answer them. I've won 10 elections by not underestimating the intelligence of my constituents. I write a very, very long and detailed email every week. I call the Farley Report. At least half the people in this room have told me that they read it and pass it on to other people, which says in detail what's happening in the legislature, how the legislature works, what things I saw happen that week, and what's upcoming, and how they can get involved. I have about 10,000 people I send it out to, and it gets forwarded to a lot more people. I think that's important, not just as a form of therapy for me to get it out, but in order to inform the electorate so they can become better informed. And I believe that once you give the information to the people directly and make that happen, then people will make better decisions. And I think, I trust people to take information and do it. And I think the problem has been, particularly on a larger statewide level, that people can't just go to door, and people can't just depend on people listening to stuff about policy. There is the television stuff. They just do that to lie on TV in 30-second spots, and people tend to take at face value what they're saying, and the more people lie in one direction, the more they'll go with that. However, we need to find a way to get to that point that our founders intended of having people pay attention to the ideas again. Because I do agree with Terry Goddard. Our democracy is at risk when it's simply people reading scripts and going on messages and taking national policy points and screaming at each other instead of compromising and creating real policy.
Well, first of all, I don't know that there's a question there, but I'm happy to speak to it. Number one, I mean, you've won 10 elections by being a Democrat in a largely Democratic district.
Not the last two.
I'd urge you to go ahead and take that same strategy and run for governor of Arizona using it, and we'll come back 4 years from now. We'll revisit how you lost by 10 points. You seem to be blaming the cynical but successful consultants for what's happened, and frankly, I
think those were your words. I don't think I said that.
I just don't see it that way. I mean, I think what you're advocating for is wonderfully quaint, and I do wish that we paid attention to the issues. I think I said that when I was talking, but at the end of the day, as a consultant, I'll go back to where I started. Your job is to help people get one more vote than the person they are running against, and that doesn't mean that as a human being I don't decry dark money. What it means is if that is the set of rules of the game, those are the rules that you play by. I mean, look, your dark money legislation is pretty much dead on arrival in this Republican-dominated legislature. And if Mr. Goddard gets his ballot initiative on the ballot, I'm sure dark money will raise millions of dollars to kill it, and he will lose. I think what you're doing is simply just a political tactic designed to appeal to your base, without any real hope of success. So, I mean, it just seems like kind of an exercise in politics, if you don't mind me saying so. I mean, I think it's a noble endeavor, but again, the chances of success are so limited that it strikes me as kind of a colossal waste of time. But I certainly appreciate it.
Well, in terms of success, I would like to say that there is dark money on the left and the right. And there are plenty of people who would like to see labor unions not spend money in dark ways, not knowing where they're coming from either. And there's plenty of people on the right who'd like to know that a labor union money is backing a candidate. Okay. So there is possibility of making that happen. But I would take issue with the idea of that policy in government is quaint, in your words. If policy in government was quaint, we wouldn't have had the Civil Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson had no reason whatsoever politically for him to sign the Civil Rights Act in 1964.
And this is an excellent conversation. Let's save it for another moment because we are in the Q&A part.
Sorry, I do this professionally.
I know you do. Thank you. Let's take our next question, please. Thank you.
My name's Judy Bowser, and my question is for the two attorneys, Ms. Jones and Mr. Goddard. Given that the Supreme Court has decided how our elections will be funded, and that there are a number of inversions taking place, is there a way, are there protections in place to preclude the use of foreign money or the involvement of foreign money in our election process?
So just specifically to the foreign money. This is a great question, and the problem is we only have disclosure over certain amounts, particularly at the federal level, so protecting against that is tough. I could go out and make an accusation that says that Mr. Goddard took 7,000 donations of $5 from people who live in Kuwait. It's very difficult for him to defend it or me to prove it on both sides of it without a reporting requirement. So that's the place to start. But we all know there's a legal process and we follow it for a reason. That's because we need to have some kind of structure to follow. And so long as the law is the law, we're going to continue to operate under it. Today, the fact of the matter is, and you'll see this in the 2016 presidential elections as the candidates start to gear up their campaigns, you'll have millions of donors giving under the reporting requirement, and not anybody will know who a single solitary one of those people is. Yeah.
Well, I spent a good deal of my career as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, going after dark money in another form. It's called money laundering, and it basically involves drug cartels trying to get their cash back in their pocketbooks in other countries. I know a lot about the various techniques that are used, and your question gets to one of the reasons that's not often talked about why dark money is such a problem, and that is it is illegal in the United States for a foreign national to be involved in our campaigns. To give, for instance, a Chinese corporation can't put money under the law into a political campaign in the United States. I think there's some very good reasons for that involve international trade and diplomacy and everything that we do as a nation. We basically don't have our politics run by someone who's not an American citizen. There are cases where dark money vehicles have been used. For example, in San Diego not too long ago, a Mexican developer came in, and Mexican national put millions of dollars into the city council race because he wanted a development approved. That's illegal. That's dark money. And that's one of many reasons why we have to be transparent about who's involved in the political process. So it's not often talked about. I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry.
My name is Judith Anderson, and I'm an aide to a Tucson City Council member. I have a comment to everybody, candidates, counselors, and journalists. Stop saying voters don't care. It's your job, every single one of you, to make us care. So what I really perked up when I heard Joe Ferguson saying that campaigns at the national level are very sexy, but they kind of lose some of that energy at the grassroots. So I'd like to hear some ideas from Joe, from all of you, about what we can do to draw that connection between policy and our constituents' individual lives, and what we can do to try to start making a difference and turning it around so voters do care.
Well, you know, I said that as the general public thinks that the national elections are sexy. I think local is sexy. I've been doing it for a decade, so that's my bread and butter all along, has been covering local races and explaining why the mayor can make your cheeseburger more expensive. So for me, I'm saying just the opposite. In terms of how to make it sexy, you know, there are some really high-paid consultants behind me that could probably explain better than I can.
Go ahead, stand up. I don't see anybody lining up.
We have, go ahead, please. Barrett.
Well, thank you for the question. But first of all, you know, we live not in the age of the low information voter, but in the age of the no information voter. So oftentimes, voters are not connected. People, first of all, they got to register to vote. Some of them whom don't even do that. Half of the population doesn't even do that. But we only had about 1.7 million people show up to vote in this last election out of 3.5 million registered voters. We had less than 50% of the registered voters show up to the polls. People have to get excited in their own way. You know, we work hard, candidates work hard every day to try and reach you. But if you don't want to be reached, if you don't want to be touched, we can't force you. And that's the problem.
David, a comment?
Well, let me, you know, I'm kind of stuck on this dark money thing for a second. And while I would love to see more transparency in elections, I guess I'd throw out a question to the panel and to everybody, which is, you know, in the United States, where the First Amendment guarantees your freedom of speech to say things, why is it so patently, I mean, Terry just compared dark money campaigns to criminal cartels and things like that. Why is anonymous speech suddenly so patently offensive in this one particular genre? I mean, I see people all day long on social media and other places making statements to which they don't append their name. And while I don't do that personally, and I'm not a big fan, if people want to make anonymous speech in a political sphere, why is that wrong?
Yeah, Christine, please.
Can I just come back to the question for a second? And thank you for the question, all right? I started a company 2 years ago for the sole and exclusive purpose of answering that exact question. What would it take to get you to vote? There are 6 million people in Arizona. Half of them are registered to vote. Less than half of those vote in an on-cycle election, which, if you do the math, means less than 10% of the population of Arizona just picked your governor. I'm not okay with that. It's one of the reasons I ran. It's one of the reasons I came up out of my private life, which, by the way, at the time did not suck. Put my face on television, painted a big giant target on my back, and invited people to attack me because I want to know the answer to that question. What would it take to get you to vote? Is it another 9/11, God forbid? Is it a personal crisis? What would it take to get you off your couch? You don't even have to go to the ballot. We'll mail you a piece of paper. What would it take? What I did in my campaign was a series of telephone conversations with people where I recruited people as ambassadors to say, if you'll do this, press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. If you will go get 2 people, just 2, not 2,000, 2 living human beings, and get them to vote that wouldn't otherwise vote, would you say yes? Thousands of people said yes. That was my contribution to it. And this is why this group is made up of women largely, because women have to do this, because women actually work. That was my prerogative. I'm the only woman on the panel. Plus, we need a little laughter here. But really, honestly, you got to go get the people around you to vote. You don't have to get every person in the state. Just get the people you know. Just get them to the poll. Get them to fill out the piece of paper. It's really critical. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting here talking in another 6 months, in another 6 years, in another 60 years about how annoyed you are with the people who represent you. We got to get people to vote. It matters. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the answer.
Oh, one more.
One more. I think this is what nobody involved in politics, and I now can say I'm not, so let me say that there's a shared responsibility here, and the key is responsibility. It's not up to the consultants or the candidates to make people vote. People have to feel responsible for their democracy, and they have to take ownership. And I think there are 2 items about the last election that are very disturbing. The first was the wave of corporate money, 5, 6, maybe 10 times in some cases, more cash in individual races than we ever seen before. The other was what Christine Jones just referred to. It was this amazing depression of the number of people taking responsibility in this democracy. And that is, both of them, I think, are incredibly sinister forces and ones that we all have to take responsibility for changing. One of the reasons people tell me over and over again that they don't vote or they don't participate is they don't know who's behind a particular point of view. I think it would make a tremendous difference, for example, if Arizona Public Service, the major utility in this state, is in fact behind some of the major dark money contributions. It makes a difference, to get to Mr. Leibowitz's comment. If people say this is a candidate supported by the major utility in the state who wants to increase their electric rates, they're going to vote one way. If the tagline says it's supported by Citizens for a Better Arizona or some other nice-sounding name, which is the way dark money groups tend to disguise themselves, they're going to have a different result. So honesty, transparency, I think, are critical to voter empowerment, and we need to have voter empowerment. Thank you.
This question has obviously touched a chord, so we have Max who would like to add a comment.
Well, I think your first part was how do we make it sexy to get involved in politics? So I guess our job as consultants is how do we bring sexy back?
Can't wait to
and
coming.
Talking to the right people.
Yeah. So
a different group.
But the reality is money's always been in politics, and it always will be. And Mr. Goddard's up here talking about different corporations that participated in the election, participated using their constitutional given right that the Supreme Court has upheld, right? And issues matter. Issues still matter. And look back to the special election in Florida before this election, where one candidate was outspent by millions of dollars, and the candidate who was right on the issues, according to the voters, won. And that candidate happened to be a Republican in this election. So issues still matter. People still matter. Message still matters. Yes, money was impactful in this election, but Doug Ducey, if you look, was considering running for governor for 4 years. Put together a very good campaign, stuck on message, and messages that voters agreed with. This was a Republican state that Republicans turned out more than Democrats. They have a registration advantage. That helped the Republican wave that happened in Arizona. Doug Ducey led it. Michelle Reagan benefited from it, right? The Corporation Commission candidates benefited from that. And so all this, we can sit here and try to blame anonymous money, but there's so many other things that happened in this election that people are unwilling to talk about. It's a Republican state. We have a registration advantage on Republicans, right? We have voted Republican for president for how many years? For decades, except for Bill Clinton in the 1990s. And so those sort of things need to be talked about. Issues still matter. They matter on a local. They matter on the presidential election. Money plays a part in getting those issues out. But again, I think money's important, but I still think candidates and issues are more important.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, but I would like also just to come back to my original request to all of you is please stop saying voters don't care. Thank you.
Let's move on to our next question. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Beverly Klain, and my question is posed to the three journalists. Given that, from your comments and what we see happening, that there is less impact from journalism in terms of elections and candidates, what do you think the journalistic community needs to do?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think throughout this election cycle last year, all of us devoted a lot of time to writing about not only the candidates and the campaigns and the commercials, but the issues. And you can write about, as I mentioned before, you can write about it all you want, but if the voters aren't interested in learning about it, you can't make them read it. I wish I could make them subscribe to my paper, but all I can do as a journalist is get the information out there, get as much of it out there as I can to make sure that everybody, if they want to learn, can know everything there is to know about Doug Ducey's positions, everything there is to know about Fred Duvall's positions, and everyone else's positions. But you can only make people, or you can't make people read that. If they don't want to read it, they're just going to tune it out. And unfortunately, last year, a lot of voters did.
Thank you.
I think I have a problem with the question in some regards. We have more readers than we did last year. We have metrics that say it. We have subscribers that say it. They're reading the stories. Whether they turn out is a different issue. But journalistically, we've embraced social media. We've embraced TV. We've embraced print, online. So, I mean, we're looking to read them. And I agree with Jeremy. It's a question of whether or not I can get more people to read my stories because we're there. We're putting in resources. So I don't know how to change the metric in terms of something that's more measurable for you, but we're doing what we can. We really are. We've got people at city council meetings, at board meetings, at school boards. We're covering all sorts of politics, not just races. So I'm not sure how to change the solution.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's the best of times, it's the worst of times to be a reporter. The tools that are available to us, our ability to reach a larger audience has never been greater because of the internet, because our stories get posted, they can be read worldwide, although I really don't know why someone in China would care that much about a Tucson City Council election. But nonetheless, and the information out there for voters is larger than ever. There's this Project Vote Smart organization that will post whatever information they can find about candidates out online, and it gets a lot of attention. But it also became a spot for opposition research for candidates, these fine consultants here to go and hunt down where candidates stood on things. So candidates stopped participating in actually providing information to Project Vote Smart. So in terms of, what I think we need to do is just continue to innovate, to continue to participate in social media on top of what we already do, to be out there on our daily blogs and trying to get as much information out there as possible. But again, you can't make people absorb your information if they're not inclined to do so.
Thank you for your perspectives.
I think we have time for one more question.
My name is Myra Hopper, and I'd like to address this to the two candidates who are also attorneys. And what would they suggest as a legal avenue to limit the amount of dark money?
Well, the Supreme Court has spoken fairly strongly about limits, so that's something that's pretty much off the table. So I propose this. We do away with dark money by making it transparent. That's what Senator Farley's working on, Representative Bruce Wheeler and others. It's an uphill sled in this legislature where so many of the incumbents essentially owe their seats to dark money forces and anonymous political contributions and activities on their behalf. And so maybe it has to come back to all of us as voters in terms of a proposition, an initiative. That's one way to get around all the noise and furor and to find another answer. But you get rid of dark money by having transparency. And that's what I think the only answer is, and I think that's very affirming for everybody in our state, that they know who's behind every position and they're able to hold everyone who participates in the political process accountable. I think that's absolutely critical. Thanks.
Thank you. Christine.
This is great. This is the first time I've gotten the since you're a lawyer question for a little while. I kind of consider myself a recovering lawyer, but I am also, if you followed my campaign at all, you know, a fierce defender of the Constitution. Not just the Second Amendment. Okay, I did 27 Second Amendment events all over the state, and I had a really good time doing it. But the Second Amendment gave us the First. It's the reason we exist. It's the reason we're having this conversation. It's the reason you can go to church or not. It's the reason you can be Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or whatever other thing you want to do. The First Amendment matters. We have to protect it. The one legal way, because the Constitution says the Congress shall enact no law abridging the right of the people. It's not optional. It's not a suggestion. It is very plain in 5 words. The one way to get there on a legal basis, and I'm doing the lawyer thing off the fly here, so bear with me, I think is to take the motive out of the spending of the anonymous speakers. We have to protect their right to speak. Yours, whether it's backed by money or not. You can go put a flyer around the city of Tucson saying whatever you want to say, and you don't have to put your name on it. That's the beauty of anonymous speech. Nevertheless, if we take the motive away, the incentive away from spending money on it, by unleashing the limit on the non-anonymous speech, on the identified speech, I think you take a lot of the wind out of the sails as a practical matter of the people who are doing that spending, and it gives you the transparency that the former Attorney General is talking about. And actually, I think it's something that we could all agree on a nonpartisan basis, to say, give what you want, just tell us who you are. And that's one way to get there legally and constitutionally and not fly afoul of the Supreme Court precedent since it's in existence today. So thanks for the question.
I think one of the things we should look at is what would have changed this election cycle if we would have had this transparency. And I'll tell you, my professional opinion is that not a lot. And so everyone's up here saying, this full transparency would have changed it, and my guess is it wouldn't. I'm all for full transparency. I think it's a great idea, but I don't know if a lot would have changed with who our governor is, or who the Secretary of State is, or who our corporation commissioners are right now. And so, the transparency, I think it's the right thing to do. I just don't know if it's going to bring about the change that these two candidates want. So, thank you.
Well, let's do it and see what happens.
Let's do it.
Yes. Well, thank you. To our audience, you've been wonderful. Thanks to our panelists. So let's wrap up. I hope this discussion has helped you understand some new challenges facing our democracy. Bob Dylan was right, the times they are a-changin'. As we said at the beginning, the League of Women Voters has been fighting for voter rights and education for nearly a century. We're not stopping now. You can help in the process by joining the League. You can learn more on our website, lwvgt.org. My thanks to the many League volunteers who helped with this production. Our thanks to the great people here at Access Tucson for their assistance and support. For the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson, I'm Roxanne Housley. Thank you for joining us.
This program has been a public service of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Learn more at lwvgt.org.